Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Eickhoff, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at John Carroll University. Thank you for joining us for the next installment of A.C.E.S, the Alumni Continuing Education Series. A.C.E.S was established in spring of 2013 by the Office of Alumni Relations in the spirit of lifelong learning. The program offers enrichment opportunities for alumni and friends through the expertise of members of our JCU administration, faculty, and alumni community. As a result of COVID and our inability to connect with all of you in person, although we have done a couple of times, we moved most of our programming online. Over the past 19 months, we've heard from experts on ethics and leadership, the political and economic impact of COVID-19, racial equity and social justice, disruptive technology, neurodevelopment, and the women's suffrage movement, just to name a few. Tonight, we will explore current trends in marketing and communication. Before I introduce our moderator, I want to share a few housekeeping items with you. First, we encourage you to view the program in full screen mode. Additionally, please ensure that you stay muted throughout the duration of the program. We will have an opportunity to ask questions later. Please utilize the chat feature, and I will curate those and send them along to our moderator so that they can be answered when we have that opportunity. It is now my honor to introduce our moderator for tonight's program, Dr. Peggy Finucane. Peggy Finucane, PhD, is a member of the JCU class of 1980 and is chair of the Tim Russert Department of Communication and Associate Professor of Communication at John Carroll University. Dr. Finucane teaches the internship capstone courses and directs the department's internship program. Previously, Dr. Finucane directed the university's Center for Service and Social Action. Dr. Finucane researches interpersonal uses of mediated communication. She has studied television, cell phones, and social media. One of her fun pieces of research focused on women co-viewing The Bachelor. Her other research focuses on the media, experimental learning outcomes, and biographies of women in the media. Teaching is an important part of her work. In 2005, following a nomination from students, Dr. Finucane won the College of Arts and Sciences Lucrezia Colicchio Teaching Award. In 2006, the university awarded the Curtis Miles Award for Faculty Service to Dr. Finucane. The award recognizes faculty for service to the university as well as the community. Dr. Finucane had created a course, Cultivating Community, that exposed students to different aspects of urban life. The culminating activity was a day of service building community gardens in Cleveland's Huff neighborhood, one of Cleveland's poorest neighborhoods. Ohio Campus Compact awarded Dr. Finucane the David Hoke Memorial Award for Excellence in Service for her efforts in the Cleveland community. Peggy, thank you for being with us this evening. We are so thrilled that you can be with us to moderate this wonderful panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm so happy to have Jeff, Trisha, and Lisa with us, and such a great group of people. So what I'd like to do first is introduce them. So Trisha Barrett is of the class of 2000, and she's the Chief Operating Officer at Crowley Webb. In addition to leading the overall operations of the 120-person agency located in Buffalo, New York, Trisha is responsible for the agency's healthcare patient recruitment division, Praxis, where she oversees all aspects of the business for the agency's pharmaceutical and biotech clients. Trisha is extremely committed to the Western New York community, where she serves on several boards, most notably Leadership Buffalo, Hoffman Woodward Medical Research Institute, and Women's United, a division of United Way, dedicated to uniting women through philanthropy, leadership, and volunteerism. Trisha, thanks for joining us this evening. We also have Jeff Culleton, who is from the class of 2003, and he is the President of Engagement Strategy at AdCom. In his role, Jeff is responsible for external agency marketing strategy, developing new enterprise client relationships, and overseeing part of AdCom's client base. Over his career, Jeff has worked with enterprise brands such as KeyBank, Great Lakes Brewing Company, J.M. Smucker Company, and Bob Evans. Prior to his time at AdCom, Jeff was a member of 2 marketing technology startups and spent time concentrated in Salesforce's Marketing Cloud partner ecosystem. Jeff and his wife, Lori, who met at John Carroll, live in Lakewood with their kids, Maggie and Noah. Jeff's a member of the John Carroll University Alumni Board of Directors and is currently co-chair of Cycle Nation, an American Heart Association event. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us this evening. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Peggy.
And last but not least, Lisa Zone, class of 1998, is the managing director at Dixon Eaton. Lisa spearheads Dixon Eaton's marketing communications practice, helping clients define and implement strategies to engage customers. She leads the firm's major branding initiatives, develops product launch programs, and helps both business to consumer and business to business companies harness the power of digital communications, including advertising and social media marketing programs. Lisa is past president of the American Advertising Federation of Cleveland and an alumna of Cleveland Bridge Builders Leadership Program. She was honored by Crain's Cleveland Business in its 40 Under 40 program in 2010, was recognized by the YWCA of Greater Cleveland as a Woman of Professional Excellence in 2012, and received the Young Alumni Award from John Carroll University in 2015. Lisa, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And please join me in welcoming all three, Jeff, Lisa, and Trisha. So we have some questions. We shared some ideas and that ahead of time. And we'll start with a question I'll ask each of you to address. For organizations that only have so many resources to dedicate to marketing communication, what do you feel they should begin with? What will help drive their message best? Who'd like to take that on first? Trisha?
Sure. Thanks, Peggy, and nice to see all of you. Good evening. Thrilled to be with you. I think when thinking about organizations that have limited resources, something that tends to come up a lot of times is that they look to hire a marketing professional. But what does marketing really mean? Do you need somebody who's a PR expert, a graphic designer? Do you need a web designer? What are you really looking for? And I think trying to get to the heart of what it is that your organization needs the most is certainly going to be important, because trying to find that unicorn and trying to find that person who can do everything for you is probably a bit unrealistic. So I think really trying to be smart about what it is that are your objectives and your needs, and then putting together a plan from there. I also think another great place to start is with a content strategy. And so what does that content strategy look like? Who are your audiences? Who are you trying to talk to? What messages are you trying to convey to those particular audiences? And if you take a step back and try and create that outline or try and create that plan, I think hopefully you'll be able to determine what it is exactly that you need, whether it's for internal resources that need to be assigned or hired, or potential partners that you can reach out to help accomplish some of those goals. So I think those would be some of my initial thoughts for those companies that are limited with their resources.
Thanks, Trisha. Jeff, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I believe I am unmuted. So when we deal with smaller organizations or limited resources, I think one of the things that we preach pretty typically is honest conversations. So to Trisha's point, there's a lot of people who look to try and manifest a unicorn. They don't exist. And if they do, they get paid a lot of money by somebody way bigger than you. And so honest conversations about the business and what the connectivity between marketing and an end result on the sales side of things, I think is huge. The second piece of it is not chasing shiny objects. So, it's extraordinarily easy in a marketing environment to chase what's new. I know we're going to talk a little bit probably about TikTok later. Things like TikTok, if we go back a handful of years, things like Instagram and so on and so forth, and things like programmatic advertising. So there's a lot of things you can do. The honest conversation around who we are, what we do, where our audience is, can lead you to, these are the things that we should do, these are the things that we can do, and those are the places that you should focus. So I think Trisha made a good point. You know, in a lot of ways, I think for small companies, it's kind of like when you paint a room, it looks a lot better if you tape it off first. It's annoying, but you tape it off, room looks better in the beginning or at the end of the day. And that's the planning process. You got to plan that stuff out, because people jump the gun because marketing is easy to do poorly. And so I think, having the discipline to not chase shiny objects and then having honest conversations internally about who you are and who you aren't are the best ways to succeed, but also to avoid a lot of wasted money.
Thanks, Jeff. Lisa, would you like to add some things?
Sure. I've got a couple thoughts. One is messaging. Trisha alluded to it. It's critically important to get your messaging right at the outset, because if you're not saying the right things to the right people, then it doesn't matter how many times you say it, because it's just not going to resonate. So we would always recommend starting with a message map exercise where you really think about, at the highest level, who's your organization, what's important for people to know, and then think about your discrete audiences and what do they care most about, and make sure you're capturing that messaging in a way that's compelling to them. You can use customer feedback, or you can even use website analytics to tell you what kinds of things people are most interested in learning from your organization. But messaging, key. The other thing I would say is, and apologies, my dog just came up right next to me, so she might be making a guest appearance. The other idea I would have is an exercise that we call keep, stop, start. And the concept here is to knock out the stuff that maybe you're doing just because you've always been doing it. And it's taking away from your ability to add new things to your suite of marketing because you just don't have the bandwidth to take it on. So the idea of keep, stop, start is you write down, you do 2 exercises. Every single thing you do gets its own Post-it note. So customer newsletter, sell sheets, Twitter, whatever your activities are, each one gets its own Post-it note. And then you write down the things you wish you could do if you had the time or the money. So at the end of that exercise, you end up with 20, 50, 100 Post-its. And then you go through the exercise of categorizing them under keep doing it, stop doing it, or start doing it. And it's a really visual way for you to see what all is part of your marketing mix. And it also allows you to kind of see, wow, we really want to add 20 things, but we're only getting rid of 3. We need to get rid of more things. So it can be a fun exercise for your team. And it's just a good way to start thinking about how do you really focus your resources in a way that's going to be most effective and not going to distract or have too many things, trying to boil the ocean.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a really practical way to approach things. I could imagine it would work for things other than marketing communication as well.
Sure. And it can be fun too. It can be a good team building exercise as well.
Great. Thank you. We have a number of students with us today. What advice do you have for them as they look to enter the communication and marketing industry? Jeff, do you want to start with that?
I think there's a couple of things. So there's going to be an extraordinarily vast number of opportunities at your fingertips. Coming into the marketing world, when I did, people would specialize. You'd be in search, you'd be in social, you'd be in copywriting, you'd be in creative, whatever the case is. I think what is becoming much more required of strong marketers is an understanding of all the puzzle pieces and how they fit together, even if you're not hyper deep in one or the other. So I think taking the time to understand which channels are gaining in prominence and how they fit is really, really important. And the beauty of it, which I wasn't available when I was going to school or was just becoming available, is the vast majority of these things are publicly available. There's certifications available. There's, classes available. You don't have to pay for Google, Facebook, any of these want you to be more versed in their platforms to create proliferation, or whatever Facebook's going to be called at the end of the week. So I think that's, especially in coming out of school, you're going to get a lot of at bats. And I would, even though it's uncomfortable and you're going to be vulnerable and not knowing things, those things are going to pay off significantly down the line. The second piece is data now plays a central role in everything we do. It used to be that marketing creative specifically was very abstract. It was subjective to the person viewing it. And while that is still true in many ways, it is now much easier to put something into market and augment it based off of how somebody is dealing with it, how somebody's engaging with it. So I think any young marketer is doing themselves a major disservice if they do not get a really strong understanding of data analytics, how it's structured, where it comes from, and how to learn how to make it meaningful. How to learn how to make it meaningful is something that comes with experience. That is not, very few people jump into that and can see from a business's perspective why that makes sense. But the art and the science, which we talk a lot about being dual components of marketing, fluctuate a lot. No consumer of mine cares what my data says. They only react to my creative and my messaging. However, I can make really tangible adjustments to that based off of the data that I get in the back end of things. So I think you take a whole bunch of at-bats right up front. Being young is a gift in many ways. You can fail at a whole bunch of stuff and it doesn't matter. The second piece of it is really dig into analytics, dig into data, understand how it's structured, understand how it can work to the benefit.
Thanks, Jeff. Lisa, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I would say for sure, do at least one internship, if not more. When I was at John Carroll, when I started at John Carroll, I thought I was going to be a newscaster. And then I did an internship at a TV station. And I remember coming home that summer and looking at my parents and saying, I don't want to do this. So the following summer, I had an internship at a PR agency. And I stayed on part-time my senior year, and they hired me when I graduated. And had I not done that first internship before I graduated to know that that was not the path I wanted to go down, I would have wasted a couple of years focusing on learning skills that I might not have had to use. So internships for sure. The other thing I would say is students now are digital natives. So those of us who have been in the field for 20 plus years, who did our work in college on a word processor, which I'm guessing many students today don't even know what a word processor is. It's something, it takes many of us a little bit longer to learn some of these tools. The students today are digital natives. That's how they grew up. So leveraging that and making sure that they're, to Jeff's point, figuring out how their understanding and knowledge of TicTac might apply to a business setting is a real competitive advantage for students who are just coming out of classes now.
Thanks, Lisa. That's helpful. I think for everyone on, if you would have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. So particularly students, if you have specific questions about this, I'm sure all three of our panelists would be willing to give you some feedback. It seems like every year there's a new social media platform that takes off. You've alluded to this in your earlier comments. Some stick around, some fade. For organizations that want to be ahead of the curve, what can they expect as it relates to social media in the next 2 to 4 years? Lisa, would you address that one?
Sure. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future, but I can tell you that video content certainly is going to be where it's at. You can tell many things from a trend perspective by how some of these platforms start optimizing their platforms. So if you think about Instagram, if any of you are active on Instagram, they're putting much more focus on reels. They're making it much harder to just share static photos. They've come out and said that they're not a photo sharing app anymore. So video is certainly where things are heading. I think that applies to the growth of TicTac. Even when you go on your other social platforms, or frankly, all of you are probably using your phone. You have sort of a TV screen right in your hand at all times. You're probably watching a lot of video. So I think video is a place that's going to continue to grow. So figuring out how to use video, make it engaging, don't make 10-minute corporate videos. No one has an appetite for that. And I think the other thing is to really be thoughtful about accessibility. That's a thing that people are really starting to pay more attention to. So if you post a picture in your Twitter feed, have you used alt text to describe what that picture is so that a reader can pick it up and read it to someone who's using Twitter, who maybe has poor or no eyesight? So thinking about all of the ADA compliance is also something I think that marketers are going to need to be paying more attention to.
Thanks, Lisa. One additional question. How would you effectively use TicTac as a platform?
So is that for me?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I would say, TicTac is still sort of in its infancy in terms of how brands are exploring the use of it. Even major brands are still sort of dipping their toes. If you use TicTac and you're scrolling through the feed, you need to make sure that your brand feels organic and authentic to the platform. It can't, you can't have somebody scrolling and then all of a sudden there's a very jarring, very obvious ad that comes through their feed. People are just going to scroll right past it. So, I don't have specific advice for how brands should be using TicTac. I don't know, maybe Jeff or Trisha do, but I think thinking about the user experience within the platform, and then also just kind of following how some of the bigger brands are using it. If you're a B2B company, there's a lot to learn about how bigger brands are using the platform. The other thing I would say is make sure your audience is there, because it doesn't make sense to use TicTac if your target audience doesn't use it. So, and that's true of any platform. Making sure that your audience uses the platform before you invest a lot of time, to Jeff's point, versus just kind of chasing the shiny object because somebody's kid is using it and your CMO thinks you should be too.
Good, thanks, Lisa. Jeff or Trisha, would you like to add anything?
Trisha, you want to go?
Go for it.
So I think one thing, the commonality between Trisha, Lisa, and myself is, we're in the business of attention. So we have to know where attention is. And somebody can fact check me on this, but I think I'm in the neighborhood. So TikTok in the last 3 years has gone from having 100 million daily or monthly active users to having almost 1 billion. So the number of opportunities that somebody has to engage on a platform like that are really plentiful. And the targeting and the personalization and all of those kind of things become really, really relevant. We get in the conversation all the time with companies like, oh, this is a B2B environment. We don't want to use Facebook. And that makes a really large assumption that the people that you're trying to reach are quote unquote business people from 9 to 5, that they don't interact in other platforms during that time. And we all know functionally that that's false. That's not true. So being able to understand where attention is, which TikTok is certainly driving a tremendous amount of that, is extraordinarily important. But making the content that fits in that platform and that will garner an audience is a really, really personal, experience to a brand. One, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to get pretty vulnerable if you're a, kind of a legacy brand. It's a lot easier if you were, a startup who's got 3 years under its belt and everybody's 22 years old. But it's incumbent on people like us to figure out how to harness that platform with that attention for our clients. And so ultimately, there's going to be a tremendous amount of content created on a platform like TikTok or whatever comes next. And that's fantastic. And frankly, the three of us will co-opt it for brands at some point because there's so much attention there. So ultimately, I think what you have to do is not chase shiny objects, not to be too redundant, but if you're going to go into places like that, I think you have to understand that more times than not, you're going to fail a whole bunch up front before you ever possibly succeed. And so it's about being willing to take the reps and get punched in the face a couple of times before you figure out how things work together. So ultimately, TikTok is not, people have proclaimed the death of Facebook over and over and over again. And for many reasons, it probably should in some capacity, but that platform still exists with a tremendous amount of attention and paid advertising. So it is within all of us to figure out what that looks like moving forward. And it's probably not going to be 15-second dance videos. It's probably going to be, once again, co-opted by the three of us in some form or fashion by the brands that we work for.
Yeah.
I would add, Peggy, and this is, I'm hardly trying to give a case study, but I myself found I got duped by it and sucked in to it. And it was most recently, and I think it's just sort of brilliant, that there was this up and coming country star. His name's Walker Hayes, and he's messing around doing some dance moves with his kids at home. And he sings a song that has some lyrics about Applebee's in it. And it's the song called Fancy Like, I think is the title of it. And it became this TikTok craze. And everybody's mimicking this dance that's being done. And he talks about Applebee's, he talks about some of these menu items. And I just sat there and thought, okay, Applebee's, time to act. Because you weren't expecting this. You had no idea it was coming. And it's here, and now is your moment. And he talked about this Oreo shake in the song. Well, they didn't have that on the menu anymore. And it was like, somebody tell them to put it back on the menu because people are going to go and buy the Oreo shake because of this song. And all of a sudden, it's all over TikTok. It's all over Facebook. It's all over the reels of Instagram. It's everywhere. And then it dies, and it had its 5 minutes of fame. And he's back to, making up new dances with his kids in his living room. But I think that just speaks to the power that these platforms have. And it's probably a good segue into the power of the influencer and what that can mean and what that can do. And in an instance like that, Applebee's, if you did notice, which was super, super smart, they ended up putting a television campaign on air that featured the TikTok videos and the different individuals who had posted things, and all ages, all demographics. They hit diversity nail on the head. It was, they really did a great job, but I can only imagine the agency or the internal marketing department at Applebee's that had to act on that and act so quickly. So sometimes you have to strike while that iron is hot.
Yeah. So, Trisha, the question of social influencers, are they worth it? Do you want to expand on what you were talking about?
Yeah.
With
so
that?
We do a lot with social influencers. And I think you have to, again, think about your audience, think about whether it's right, think about the relevance. And I'll give you 2 examples where we've been really successful. So first and foremost, we talk about B2B brands. And I think sometimes people struggle with B2B and think, oh, you can't do innovative type of stuff, or you can't do some of this more typically consumer focused things. But we have a client called Pony Jorgensen, and they make woodworking clamps. And you would think woodworking, let's go to the, Wood Magazine and put an ad in Wood Magazine, and let's do something a little bit, more traditional. Well, there are woodworking enthusiasts that come out of the woodwork online and who are willing to share. And so by sending them product, by engaging with them to be ambassadors for the company, we've had tremendous success. And when we look at the data, because as Jeff mentioned, data is king. When you look at the data and you look at the engagement and you look at then how that drives sales, whether it's going into Lowe's and purchasing these clamps, or it's at trade shows and the type of attendance and booth traffic you might draw, it could be any number of key performance indicators that you're looking at for those metrics. I think we can attribute so much of that back to the role of the social influencers that we've engaged with. Totally different industry, to spin it on its head for a minute. Mentioned in my bio that we work a lot in healthcare and we recruit patients to participate in clinical trials. And healthcare, you would normally think like, oh gosh, no, can't explore social influencers when it comes to healthcare. Well, I think you have to go back to who's your audience, what's your message, what are you trying to convey? And what we have found is that there are so many bloggers, advocates, social influencers who, especially when it comes to rare disease and different types of area, that they are actively have communities that either they follow or that they've created and they have followers. So when we think about promoting a potential clinical trial and you've got an influencer or you've got that blogger, you've got that advocate, they can be tremendous resources to be able to help get a message out about a specific ailment or condition or opportunity that might exist for a new treatment or, clinical trial in our case. And so again, I think you have to go back to what are your goals, what are your objectives, what are your messages, who are your audiences, going through that entire strategy that we look to build up front in any project that we do. But I wouldn't be afraid to use those influencers. Now, how you use them and how you engage with them can be really interesting. A lot require a transfer of dollars. And so there's funds, and you actually are paying these influencers to promote your product. I mentioned in the case of the woodworking enthusiasts, oftentimes just giving them access to product is something that's important for them. Interestingly enough, in the healthcare space, very rarely are there ever dollars exchanged. There is very much a goodwill and an altruistic reason for helping to promote new options. So again, I think it's all part of that overall strategy.
That's great. Thank you. Jeff or Lisa? Lisa, you're unmuted. Do you want to add to this?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, Trisha did a great job of talking about how to use influencers. The only thing I would add is if you're thinking about using influencers, there's some things that you need to make sure you have lined up a contract so that both parties are clear on what it is that influencer is going to do. Are they going to do 3 posts? And in exchange for the posts, they get $500 or they get whatever, having a clear contract set up front. Vetting of these influencers, you're associating now this person with your brand. It's like using a spokesperson back in the old days. But, people love to dig up things that somebody tweeted 10 years ago and say, how could you have this person support your brand? So really doing thorough background checks or vetting of a potential influencer is important. And then the last thing is making sure that those influencers know and understand FTC rules. So many times influencers do not disclose that they were compensated in some way for whatever the post is. And that's a huge no-no. It's a personal pet peeve of mine. So it's something that I'm always advocating for. So making sure when you're working with influencers that they know they need to disclose with either hashtag sponsored or hashtag ad or something is really important, A, for your brand, to protect your brand from the FTC, but then also for that influencer too.
Thanks, Lisa. That's good. Jeff, did you want to add anything?
I think Lisa just and Trisha both hit most of those points that I would hit right on the head. I think it's extraordinarily easy to call yourself an influencer. It's extraordinarily easy to purchase followers and make yourself look like you have a community. The influencers that are super effective for a brand cultivate communities. They are actively cultivating a positive movement forward in woodworking or plumbing or whatever the case is. And those people in most likes are really, really easy to spot. I caution anybody when you start to dip your toe into the well of influencers, it's really hard to get through all of the people that are really not going to benefit your brand at all, to get to the people that are going to be, kind of those slam dunks. So, as much as it is a tactic that we call influencing now, but has been around for as long as marketing has been around, it's a lot harder now to vet somebody that's going to be appropriate for your brand. So the upfront is critical in making sure that who you align with is somebody that the organization shares values with. And it's not just somebody that the organization thinks is going to drive sales, because those short-term sales can be undercut really, really quickly with long-term brand damage if you associate yourself with the wrong people.
Good point. Thank you. We have a question from Tom. Is it fair to say that influencers will be prominent in political campaigns in the near future?
Ugh. I think they already are. Unfortunately, I think if we talk about influencers in terms of YouTube stars, and we're talking about the Paul brothers, or we're talking about, somebody like that with these massive followings, yeah, I mean, campaigns are going to absolutely harness those because they have attention and they are very, very willing to sell it. I think it's something that's probably always been a part of politics in a way, through surrogates and so on. But yeah, I think it's almost inevitable, considering the amount of power that the top echelon influencers do wield and the size of the audiences that they have access to.
Thanks. Either Trisha or Lisa want to add anything?
I would just add that, if any of you manage or do public relations, media relations, the world of reporting has also changed with the advent of social media. So reporters are now, really pressured to have big social media followings and to get a lot of engagement on their social posts and to drive traffic to their stories online. So while it's not totally related to the question, I do think thinking about reporters and journalists who cover specific topics or industries, and if they also have strong social media followings, that may impact who you pitch a story to over somebody who maybe really knows the subject matter but doesn't have a strong social media following. So it also sort of moves into the journalism and PR space when you think about influencers and how social media has changed the world of journalism over the last several years.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really continuing to change. Question about the contemporary issue of COVID-19. How has COVID-19 affected your approach to supporting clients? So many things have happened. Shopping has shifted online. The demand for home entertainment has increased. People want e-services. How have you adapted with your businesses? Trisha?
I'll jump in. So, I'll never forget March 13th, 2020, when we decided we were going to go home for a couple of days and test it out and thought we'd be back at the office at the end of the week. And that never happened. And then I remember sitting in April and writing a really, really ugly budget forecast for what I thought our clients were going to end up doing or not doing as a result of COVID. And I think what was really interesting, and certainly some industries just got hit and hammered hard, tourism and entertainment and so many others. We were very fortunate with our client base to have clients that were stable and needing to communicate more than ever, to be honest. We represent a big financial institution and health insurance company. And so brands that really needed to speak to their members, speak to their customers, and reassure them that they were going to be there and they were going to support. I think what we found was that how people were consuming media was very different. And I think Jeff can probably attest to that better than I can. But when we look at, for example, the amount of television that was watched during the pandemic and the time of day that people were watching television or consuming the news and those types of things, that it was a very, very different media mix than we maybe otherwise would have imagined for our clients. The amount of online advertising and programmatic display and online video that then was being used was very different. So we had to adjust our really strategy. I mean, not only messaging, creative, and thinking about also, if you're showing people, do you have to show them in masks? Do you have to show social distancing? What do you need to do to adjust all of the creative execution, but then also significantly that media mix? Now, interestingly enough, we have that other side of our business, which is the healthcare patient recruitment side. And I say this only because we expected clinical trials to just sort of go on pause. And who would be voluntarily visiting their doctor's office or a hospital. And then we started recruiting for all the COVID trials. And we recruited for Moderna's vaccine trial, the 30,000 patients that were needed. And what normally would have taken 4 months to do startup and get that trial up and running, we did in about 2 weeks. And so when you think about the speed in which you had to operate, and that was under Operation Warp Speed and had government funding behind it to be able to work in that trial, but it was there were no rules, and it was sort of in such a otherwise highly regulated industry in clinical research and healthcare in general. From a communication standpoint, yes, everything still had to go through regulatory review boards, but things were getting done at just record pace so that we could get those trials recruited. And obviously, we're here today, many of us, hopefully, because of some of those vaccines. So it was really rewarding, but just seeing how different industries have to shift and how things needed to be adjusted. There was such a period of unknown. And I think, the teams that were most successful were the ones that didn't put anything on autopilot and instead stopped and really took a hard look at what their messaging, their creative execution, but then also what that media mix was, both in a traditional and non-traditional setting and in a paid and an unpaid kind of way to communicate as well.
Thanks, Trisha. Jeff or Lisa? Jeff?
So Lisa, you want to go?
I have something to say, but you go first.
So I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. From first and foremost, from a consumer behavior standpoint, I think if we learned nothing from the Delta variant, was that we are still in an extraordinarily fluid situation. And as much as, some people in some geographies rushed out and tried to reclaim normalcy, it's not still where we're at. And so, anybody who thinks they've got what consumer behavior is going to look like moving forward nailed down is probably already behind the 8 ball. We're in a spot of needing to be hyper flexible, moving money from streaming platform to streaming platform or into something like TicTac, or, where are we putting things to make an impact? So, our business, the media business in general, is going to evolve as much in the next 18 months as it did in the last 18 months. And so, and that level, I think that's called Moore's Law in some way, shape, or form. But like, as much as that has enacted, we now have to be really, really flexible in a way. We've always needed to be flexible, but ultimately, the channels didn't change as fast, or the places people were didn't change as fast, or, all of a sudden Squid Game comes out and everybody piles over here in a place where I can't advertise, or something is going to pop up next week. And the level of in-tuned flexibility and need to be speaking to your customer has changed, and the velocity with which you need to be talking to them has changed so dramatically that I think full departments of people in agencies like ours are going to be developed around this kind of research moving forward. The second piece, which I think is hard, is the internal environment of creating and strategizing things in a remote work environment. So I think people conflate work from home with flexibility. And I think those two things end up being kind of different things at the end of the day. Flexibility, you can't unsee. We can't unsee what just happened. It's great to be able to control your schedule in the way that has happened. But for a lot of people, especially in our business, some of the best stuff happens serendipitously. It happens on a whiteboard that is harder to replicate in a digital environment. It happens passing each other in the hall. And so, I worry a little bit about the quality of messaging, creative, and content in the long term. And agencies are going to have to be really, really nimble to that, because, our risk factor is if we're not good, there's plenty other people to do that work. And so, I think we're going to have to be really diligent around that. I think we're going to have to be really articulate around what we mean about flexibility in somebody's work schedule, and what kinds of positions and types of jobs are fully remote versus other ones that maybe have to have some sort of internal collaboration. So it's been a huge stone dropped in the pond. Its ripples are things that we're trying to figure out, and we're going to have 10 years to look back on to see the full kind of ramifications.
Interesting. Thank you. Lisa?
When I read this question, Peggy, my immediate thought went to the Friends episode where they're trying to move a couch up a stairwell
Yeah.
and it's not going well, and they're just yelling pivot over and over and over again. Yes, thank you, Julie. The first 6 to 8 months felt like we were constantly pivoting for clients. We had a client, to Trisha's point, we have a health insurance company. They were running TV ads, and they were like, we have to pull these spots because they don't show people wearing masks, and we're a health insurance company. So we had to cut the schedule, regroup, figure it out. We had another client who's a gym, and in Ohio, the governor shut down gyms for an extended period of time at the beginning of the pandemic. So we had to shift the strategy completely to promoting online offerings. So, we were constantly pivoting. So turning things around quickly and really staying on top of what announcements were being made in terms of shutdowns. It was all, I'm sure many of you had to deal with that. The other thing we do a lot, always, but particularly in this kind of environment where people's media consumption habits are changing, is using research from places like eMarketer. If any of you are familiar with eMarketer, they've got some great media consumption research. So, we could see that podcasts were growing in popularity, which probably makes sense to a lot of you, and probably a lot of you started listening to more podcasts. So to us, then we say, okay, how should we be thinking about building podcasting into our clients' marketing mixes? Are we getting experts placed on podcasts to be interviewed? Are we doing more advertising within these podcasting platforms? So really understanding how media consumption habits change, and they always change. But during the pandemic, they changed a lot. So making sure that we were staying on top of how those trends were happening was really important for our clients, because sometimes they don't have access to the kinds of research that we do. So we could help them understand what was really happening in the universe of how people consume information.
Thanks, Lisa. That's great. We have some questions from the audience. The first one, I work in an industry that's very engineering focused. How do I approach projects where I have to work with people who may not understand the value or importance of marketing?
So I saw this question come through earlier, so I've had some time to think about it. And it's actually when Jeff was talking about data, and that would be where I would start. I would start with data and research, because that's going to appeal to that audience. They're going to understand data and research. So give them a reason to believe in what it is you're recommending to them. And they're probably going to have more trust in it than going forward.
Good, thanks.
I would add to that, I go back to what Jeff said earlier about those honest conversations, and really try and have some honest conversations with people. And if you think that that's going to be a roadblock for you, and talking to some of them, I think we have a lot of success. It's a form of data collection, if you will, but try and sit down and have some in-depth interviews with some of the key constituents at your company from all levels, not just the top. In your case, maybe talk to some of the engineers, talk to some of the other people as well, and try and ask a series of the same questions. What's working, what's not, what are the barriers, what are the hurdles, what are things that you would like to see, and start there and try and collect some of that information and boil it down into some key themes or key nuggets that then you might be able to use to begin to have that honest conversation with decision makers as to why something needs to change, or why you may need to consider implementing some sort of communication strategy.
Thanks. Jeff?
I agree. When in scenarios like that, so often we just have to boil things down to a math problem, which fortunately enough now we have the ability to do in a way that we never did before. In sometimes those hyper analytical environments, it takes some of the passion, the fun, the sexiness out of what you ultimately create. But we're a professional services business. We're in the business of advising and strategizing and moving the needle. And that's not always, creating cat videos and doing TikToks with the younger people in our organization. So yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the more you can make things a math problem, the harder they are to refute.
Thank you. We have another question. Do you have any advice for a novelist seeking exposure and fans to sell books and to get reviews? Is TikTok the main outlet? Are there other important channels, PR or buying ads?
Lisa, that feels like a you question.
Oh, thanks. So I would say you really have to think about who's actually using TikTok and whether the novel you're putting out is going to appeal to that audience. Without knowing what the content of the novel is. I actually have a friend who just launched a book yesterday, and she used influencer marketing in the form of her friends who have pretty big social followings and people who work in her industry. So she built excitement around this book that was coming out. She also hired a publicist who did, the requisite promotion from a PR perspective to get the book out. Some of what she did was pushing, when the book was released on Amazon, it was really important for her to crack the top 10 that day. So, she was working the phones and the text really hard so that we were all buying the book so that she could say it was top 10. And then, you build that momentum that way too. So, but she did hire a publicist from a PR perspective. I don't know that she did much in the way of advertising or PR, but that could make sense as part of your overall integrated program too.
I was going to say another neat approach could be to try and find book clubs and get in touch with different book clubs and offer to give the book to some of those different book clubs. And you could put the ask out for people to share that type of thing on social media for, looking for groups and looking who to reach. So you could have fun going that route too.
And I see here in the chat that it's a romance book. So, I mean, you could also, think about, there's podcasts that talk about The Bachelor and other types of, dating shows. And is there a way to Trisha's earlier point, those people are influencers among the audience who already sort of likes that kind of topic. So you could also think about going that kind of route as well, sending them, a advanced copy of the book.
This is where social media actually is a huge benefit to people, because you can get so hyper targeted. I think you need to be careful of putting things just on TikTok, because TikTok seems like it has an audience. But being able to call down to very specific groups, enter very specific groups. But when push comes to shove in something like this, to Lisa's point, this is PR. This is getting in front of people, getting people interested, very guerrilla, very time-consuming tactics. You can't fake your way to success with a book. You need to create those environments where people are willing to give you their most valuable asset, their time, in order to, and there's not a value exchange there that you can create without telling people it's a great story. So I think that's longer form. That's being in those groups, that's building up momentum.
Thank you. And we're just about out of time. One thing that I would like to bring to people's attention, that the John Carroll, the Bowler College of Business, and the Russert Department of Communication recently launched some certificates in content marketing and branding, social media advertising, and marketing analytics. And those are starting to roll out now. Dr. DeVos, who is on our call tonight, is teaching the first class, just started this week. But those are going to be available. There's 3 courses to each certificate, 3 certificates, and 1 class additional that's a capstone. You would earn a Master of Science degree in digital marketing and communication strategy. And several of our panelists helped us with reviewing the information and looking at the proposed program, and very helpful, before we did our research with them, looking at what we were proposing, and we've gotten some good feedback. And so if you're interested, let us know. And Dr. DeVos says, feel free to email me if you have questions. It's cdevos@jcu.edu. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you to our panelists. A round of applause for them would be wonderful. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you. Eric, back to you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all again so much for being with us tonight. Jeff, Lisa, Trisha, and Peggy. We appreciate you being willing to share your expertise with all of us and taking time out of your schedule to be with us this evening. We are incredibly fortunate to have you not only within the alumni community, but willing to share your expertise with our alums and our students as volunteers, as passionate alumni. So thank you again for your help and being with us this evening. Before we conclude, I want to share a few other opportunities that you all have to take advantage of for upcoming program through the Office of Alumni Relations. On Wednesday, November 3rd, Professors Andy Welke and Sean Zhang will address a number of points in one's lifetime that important financial planning decisions arise. The talk will identify stages and identify important things to consider as you ponder your options. We'll be sending an email out about that tomorrow. On Thursday, November 18th, alumnus Jim Moses from the JCU class of 1980, Vice President of Dallas-Fort Worth Operations for American Airlines, will return to campus to speak with alumni and students about the future of air travel, his journey from JCU to DFW, the fourth busiest airport in the world, and his leadership philosophy that creates a culture that puts his over 8,000 person team members first. Also, please mark December 11th on your calendar. The team in alumni relations is already gearing up for the Christmas season, and we promise you will not want to miss this year's celebration. It will be a blend of one of JCU's most beloved traditions, as well as the beginning of a new tradition that will fill your heart with Christmas cheer. You can find more information about these programs and register for all of our programs, including other programs like the Alumni Author Series, Scholarly Luncheons, our Alumni Continuing Education Series, and our Alumni Spotlight events at jcu.edu/alumni. Additionally, we invite you to review recordings of all of our previous programs on the JCU Alumni Association YouTube channel. To view our extensive library, search John Carroll University Alumni on YouTube. Finally, please consider a charitable gift to John Carroll in support of our students, our faculty, and our entire campus community. If you already made a gift this year, thank you for your generosity. If you have not, please join me in supporting John Carroll so that we can continue to deliver an outstanding education for our current and future Blue Streaks. You can make a donation by visiting jcu.edu/give. Thank you again for joining us. Take care, be well, stay safe, and onward on John Carroll.